Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alice. As Alice said, I'll be running through how to back up your Salesforce data with Gearset today. We'll cover a few things. Obviously, we'll start off with a little bit of a presentation. We'll jump out afterwards to a demo run through as well, just show you everything sort of real time and how it would work if you were to do it yourself. So of course, Alice has already mentioned, but my name's Jack Weatherly, lead account executive here at Gearset. I've been doing this for a few years now. Spoke at Dreamforce last year, which was great fun, really enjoy this kind of work. So hopefully we'll have a good session today as well. So very, very briefly, I did want to just talk about who Gearset is as a whole. I'll sort of be quite a percentage of people watching this today who will be quite familiar with Gearset, but for anybody that's new to Gearset as a tool, we're basically an end-to-end release management tool for Salesforce. So release management and DevOps as a whole really has quite a few pieces that play into it. Core parts such as a comparison and deployment functionality on the metadata side. You've got data migration, for testing purposes, for moving CPQ config data, and of course, data backup is a big part of that process as well. Gearset as a whole, the goal is to have all of those tools, all that functionality under one roof, and really to provide that whole solution for you. So we're going to run through three core things today. First of all, just some fundamentals on data backup, what it is, how it works, that kind of basic stuff. If you saw our previous webinar, you'll probably be up to spec on most of this, but really just a quick run through presentation on that side. We'll touch briefly on who needs to be thinking about data backup as well. Is it for everybody? Who isn't it for? Who is it for? Etc. We'll cover that up in second, and then finally, of course, that full run through using Gearset Live. We'll jump out to the actual website and just show you around a little bit there. So let's jump into the fundamentals of data backup then. This is going to take the form of three major components. That first one is going to be the really, really obvious one, the one that everybody thinks about when you talk about data backup. It's downloading and storing data somewhere. Quite often, when kids back at school, you save your homework twice on the computer just in case you somehow lose one version of it. That's probably the most basic example I can think of. Obviously, we get into more complex enterprise solutions and other requirements come into play. The biggest one is saving that data somewhere else. So duplicating your data within Salesforce would be fine, but if Salesforce goes down, obviously we want that data to be accessible outside of Salesforce, and so we use AWS multi availability zones within that as well. So that's obviously going to be your first stage, and then a pretty crucial one as well. Stage two is going to be monitoring that backup. So it's all well and good having your backup running for years and years on end, but if you never know when anything's changed, it's probably not much use to you, especially on data that isn't accessed all that frequently. The last thing you want to happen is to lose that data and only notice 3 months down the line. The further back we're talking about when you try and restore that data, the more and more difficult it gets. So really the crucial thing here is finding out that something's happened to your data as soon as possible and being able to restore that right away. So really that monitoring sort of functionality. The other key part to this is knowing what data is gone and what data has been corrupted or changed. It's very, very difficult to restore data when you don't know what's missing. And if you go into that blind, you can risk causing even more problems, overwriting data that was perfectly fine, perfectly intact. So that monitoring part is really, really important when it comes to your response time and your response process as well. Stage three is going to be restoring that data, of course. So the actual process of getting that data from your backup and pushing it back into an org. Within the whole process, that's really the most difficult thing to do. Moving metadata, we found out over the years, is pretty challenging. There's some real caveats to it. Moving data, restoring data is even more difficult. So it's a really complex solution for a really complex problem, and there's lots going on here. And what we say really is that this is the hard part. Actually getting that data back into your org is the bit that you need to be worrying about, really. At the end of the day, you can have all your backups stored in 100 different places, all your data stored all over the world, but if you can't get it back into an org, then it's probably not all that much use to you. So who needs to be thinking about data backup? Sometimes this is an organizational question. Is it my responsibility? Is it the IT team? Who's that going to fall to? But in this sense, and the way I mean it today, is really just overall as Salesforce users who should really be thinking about data backup. There's only one really big question, and that's what would you do if tomorrow your Salesforce instance just disappeared? You lost all your data. What would you do? What's your current plan for fixing that problem? Because it could happen. Obviously, we hope it doesn't. And Salesforce, has a track record of being pretty reliable, but they're not impervious to data loss. So that question again, what would you do if you lost all of your data tomorrow? If you're not entirely sure, then obviously this is what the talk's for. So moving on here, I guess globally, the answer to that first question is that everybody's at risk in some way or another. SaaS products as a whole, are not exempt from the risks of data loss. Just because somebody else is managing our storage doesn't mean that they're going to do a perfect job of it. There may well be something in your agreement with them that they'll refund your fees, but at the end of the day, if they lose the data, we're talking about a lot more than just license fees. It's loss of responsibility, facing the customer, reputation, and all that kind of thing. So there can be lots of causes. Salesforce outage is one I mentioned. Human error, malice, a little bit less so, but human error can be a really big one. And we'll actually cover an example of that in just a second. And then just your data integration. Somebody sets that up wrong. You can wipe all sorts of data. Setting up integrations that can be very, very powerful. So lots of sources for issues, and they can crop up at any time. So a quick sort of anecdotal story here. I think this one came off sort of a user group forum kind of thing, but this user here essentially was just trying to upload 2,500 records. He actually did that a little bit wrong, moved the wrong records, not the end of the world, so they decided to delete them, start again. Everything was going fine up until that point, but they deleted every single record within the org that matched that filter, not just the new ones. So they deleted about 100,000 records. To compound this issue, they didn't realize immediately. So it was quite a long time before they actually realized what had happened. And that just makes it so much more difficult to recover from. So yeah, even day-to-day things you might be doing can cause some pretty major incidents. One thing I push you to do just before we jump into the live run through here is just have a look at our ebook on data backups. So a small caveat to that, it's not actually been published just yet, but Ellis has promised me that it won't be long at all. It's basically finished. It's a really nice piece. It's about 45 pages long, so it does cover an awful lot of information that we won't get to cover today. At the end of the day, knowledge is power, and that particular bit of knowledge is completely free on the website, so nothing to lose on that one there. So with sort of that background in mind, we can run through backing up your own orgs, and we can jump out to Gearset website here. So as Ella said before, do feel free to pop questions in the chat as we go through. Working from home, as I'm sure everybody is, I've only got one monitor at the moment, so I can't actually see that page. But Ellis will jump in and ask me any questions as they come through. So I'm on gearset.com here. If you have an account, once you log in, you can request a free trial from us there. Alternatively, if you don't have an account, you can sign up for a free trial anytime, 30 days to test out everything we've covered today, and of course, the rest of the app as well. So I'll log in here to the app itself. I'll log in with my Salesforce credentials, makes it nice and easy. You can use Google or LinkedIn as well. I think I should have those credentials already cached up here, and they'll take me straight through to my account. On the left-hand side here, you can see all the functionality that Gearset has. Obviously, for today, we're focusing on the data backup side, so we'll jump down to that section here. Just before we start getting into sort of the nitty-gritty of setting up jobs and actually doing the data backup itself, just touch on Gearset as a service, as a platform, how it works. So Gearset is entirely based in AWS. There's nothing to install in your org, so there's no managed package, nothing like that to worry about, and of course there's no sort of local app to download onto your machine either. Just log in. We connect to all your orgs via the APIs, and that allows us to push and pull data, all encrypted, REST and in transit throughout the whole process. On this data backup jobs page here, you can see I've actually got 2 jobs set up and running already. But let's jump in and just have a look at how we can set up a new job here. And this is going to really be the first step into the first pillar of backup here, which is that download and storage section. So if I click Add New Job, I can give the job a name, of course. So we'll fire in production backup there. I can choose an org. This will be one of the orgs I've already authorized within the app just by going through the OAuth flow. I'll choose production here. Does make the most sense.
Oh, Jack, 1 second. Your microphone's on a little bit fuzzy.
Sorry about that. Let me just see if I can mute myself, unmute myself, and do a few things and see if that fixes anything.
That's okay.
How are we sounding?
It sounds the same. We can still hear you. It's just the quality isn't as high anymore.
Okay. I'm going to have to blame my Chromebook, I'm afraid. So I think that is the guilty party here. I will carry on. It is on a stand, but I'll prop it up a little bit more, see if we can get some airflow going. I might even just stand up and open a window as well.
William on the chat said it sounds fine to him, so I think it's possibly worrying over nothing, so feel free to ignore me.
Okay, that's all right. You just want to rattle my nerves a little bit, do you?
Apologies.
All right, well, we've got a window open. Hopefully that'll cool things down, and yeah, hopefully you can all hear me okay. So yeah, running through the setup here, we're obviously given this job a name, we've chosen the org as well. Next thing we want to do is set an API call usage limit. So quite often when we're running through this with new trialists, prospective customers, they're slightly worried about the number of integrations they have in their production environments. If you do have a really integration-heavy environment, obviously you're going to be using up a fair amount of those API sort of call tokens. This functionality here, this limit, it basically pauses the Gearset job when you hit a certain threshold. So if you are worried, you can bring this down, really restrict it, especially during the trial period, just so you sort of get a gauge of how much sort of that API usage will be taking up. So far, I have to say, I haven't encountered anybody who's actually had an issue using the tool, but it is just a nice safety net to have. Certainly the last thing we want to do is have you hit 100%. Last one down here is going to be setting a time for the job to run. So pretty obvious, most ones just midnight, but you might have a different time you prefer to run that particular job, especially just considering time zones that your sales and support teams might be working in, but midnight tends to make the most sense. And a little one here, just to run the first backup after you save the job. Do you want that to run right now, or do you want us to hold off until midnight? Next couple of tabs here, we're going to be looking at the notification settings. We're starting to move towards the monitoring and visibility sort of pillars of backup here, but we can fill these in. Obviously, we do recommend getting some good information in here, some integrations to Slack and Microsoft Teams as well. We personally use Slack here at Gearset, so we've got direct integrations into dedicated channels for all of these notifications. MS Teams obviously working the same way. But pop your email address in here. You can put multiple, so if you do have a team responsible for this or responsible for responding to any kind of issue, then you can get their information in there as well. Obviously, text messages supported as well. The notifications on this particular page are essentially going to be a pass-fail notification. So that's really just the basic running of the backup, just so you're aware that that one is still running. Let's say if your credentials expire or something. The smart alerts, where we're going to get a bit deeper really into that idea of monitoring. We want to be able to highlight anything bizarre or untoward that's happening to our data. So in this case, I want to be notified when more than, let's go for 5% of the records for account get removed, and maybe if, let's say, 15% of the records for account get changed. We'll have a look in a second at really what the normal looks like with some of the other visibility tools. You can set these up sort of as a baseline and then modify them as we go through. Set up loads of these and they really, really will help you respond to incidents much more quickly. The last piece here is going to be metadata filtering, essentially. So this is choosing which objects you want to back up the records for. You can select absolutely everything in here. There's a really nice section in the ebook, however, which talks about slimming down your backup. Lots of benefits to this, jobs running really, really quickly, reducing your API usage, but the big one is reducing noise. So if there's anything in here that you genuinely have no use for backing up, you're never going to want to restore it, and you don't really care about it, you may as well get rid of it. Essentially, any changes to those components can hide or essentially drown out changes that could be absolutely crucial to your business. So I won't dive into too much to that sort of theory on that, but there is a lovely section in the ebook that covers that in a bit more detail. From there, click Save, and the job is basically ready to go. So you don't have to worry about really any kind of complex setup. All gets done there for you. You also don't have to worry about the storage for Gearset. Talking about the initial download and the backup itself, but the storage, actual data centers, that process is all handled by Gearset. All the encryption, it's all single tenancy, so none of your data gets mixed in with any other customers. And you do maintain control over the encryption key as well. So all that storage is handled by Gearset, and it's just another thing that you don't have to worry about. So with that job set up, essentially now, once a week, you'll get a full data backup. That'll pull in absolutely everything from your org, and every day in between that, so every 24 hours, we'll run a partial backup, and that'll just take anything that's changed within the last 24 hours. There's a bit of a balance there between speed on those full runs versus those partial runs, reliability, API usage again, but what we found is that running that full backup once a week is a really nice middle ground. With that backup running, of course, now we can jump into things like monitoring and visibility to really get a grasp of what's taking place within our org. So I'll jump in and view the details here. And the first thing you'll be greeted with is this overview page. So we've got the changes that are happening in my org day by day. And you can see that actually the changes that are taking place in my org pretty consistent. I don't have any massive spikes or fluctuations all that much. If there was a massive great red bar in here, or maybe even loads of changed items, that would be a pretty obvious visual notification that something might have gone wrong. Down the bottom of the page, we can actually see each individual run, which is populating this graph at the top. This is going to allow you to choose individual days or individual runs that you want to dive into, and we can start picking apart the history here to really understand what is happening in the environment. So we'll pick a particular run here. Let's go for June 2nd, and we can view the details and start to understand what's changing within this environment. I just backed up, in this case, a couple of objects. Let's jump into contact. We'll load this one up. We'll actually show us a full diff of the records, essentially that changed within this backup run. So when we ran this run, this individual backup, what had changed since the last backup run? So essentially a comparison of your data between 2 points in time. In this particular case, we can see that there were 355 deleted records. So all of these people essentially been deleted. We've got a lovely load of sort of generic test data, but Charlie Thompson there got deleted from this org. We can have a look at changed records as well. So you can see the previous backup, this particular record down as a Harry Wood, and that's been changed, sort of repurposed, I guess, to a James Wilson. So loads of changed records here. And of course, you've got your new records, so anything that's been created and added back into the org. You can change up here and have a look at different objects. You can add filters here, and you can search through any of the records or the actual contents of the records as well. So if I want to find how many new records for people called John did we have, and you can see, well, in fact, loads of people with the surname Johnson, so probably not the best search there. This is going to give us really the full visibility. Having the diff is really, really helpful when it comes to debugging what could have happened. What is the source of this error as well? It's all well and good knowing which records have changed, but what actually changed within them is going to give you lots and lots of information. We've got a couple of other tabs that we can run through here. We've got the object analysis. It's going to give us a pretty similar overview to the last one, but this is going to come down to, honestly, the object level, showing us what's happening to specific objects over time. We can see the account object pretty stable in this particular case, but again, you can jump down into the individual runs, start to understand what's happening, what's changing. We've got a full audit history as well for deleted records, just to help you track what data is being removed.
We've just got a question here, Jack, on how many records can we back up?
So it's essentially unlimited. I think our biggest backup job just hit over 2 terabytes, I think it was. So, it's some serious data coming through. In terms of the sort of technical capability in that sense, there's no real limit, or certainly not one that we've found yet. Feel free to challenge us on that if you've got a particularly large org. In terms of sort of licensing, that's unlimited as well. So really, you don't have to worry about it all that much. We've also got unlimited retention and sort of granularity as well. So it doesn't matter how far back in time those records were backed up, that's all maintained for you as well.
That's great. Thanks, Jack.
No worries. From this point here, essentially what we've got to is a fully backed up org, taking these backups pretty regularly here, and we started to understand what's changing within my org. What does normal look like? That's another really big factor here. I know that this looks pretty standard. I've got familiar with it, jump in and check it relatively regularly. And that allows me to notice things that are a little bit untoward. Obviously, the next thing we need to do is start talking about what is going to happen when we want to restore the data. So predominantly today in here, I'll be running through the actual sort of technical process, as it were, of restoring the records. There will be a lot of process to go through on your end when you start talking about what is your recovery process, what's your incident response plan, what does your actual disaster recovery process look like. Of course, today focusing on the technical side a little bit more.
Jack, before you show that restoration, we've just had a few questions from Madan here. So they've asked, with PII and PHI data, is it all encrypted at the same level, or is that something that you need to specify during the backup? And also, how is it affected by using Salesforce Shield? Is that a sort of consideration that we need to think about when using backup?
Yeah, of course. So we'll start off with the encryption question. Essentially, everything gets the same treatment. Everything's encrypted at rest and in transit. So essentially, full encryption for everything all the time. That just helps if anything slips through the net in terms of PII, PHI identifiers as well. It just means that everything is as secure as it can be. In terms of Salesforce Shield, I do believe we've got some customers using it already. There were some questions on how it impacts performance. So I think jobs run a little bit slower when you're using Shield. We're not talking, fivefold. I think it's 10, 20%, something like that. I think that was the only real thing we encountered, as far as I remember. But definitely one for me to check back in on again, I think, and we'll find out a little bit more. If you want to try testing it out, drop us a message in the chat here as well when you do that, and we'll just confirm that that works for you there as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so we'll crack on then with the restoration process, what that's going to look like. The first thing to do, and it might sound a bit strange, it is quite often going to be a metadata restore. Depending on how quickly you've been able to respond to an incident, I mean, if we're talking a couple of hours, then your metadata probably hasn't changed. Might still be worth checking though. If we're talking about a number of days, weeks, months, almost certainly something will have changed within the environment. Trying to restore data into a metadata schema that doesn't match when it was taken, it is kind of like taking a piece from a different puzzle. It becomes very tricky. So the first stage to any real data recovery process is going to be to make sure your metadata is back to how it was at the time of the run. So of course, with that in mind, all of our backup runs do take a full metadata snapshot as well. If we open up a run here, you can see the option to compare and restore metadata. I'll give you any differences between when the backup was taken and the org as it currently exists, and you can reset that, get them aligned so that the data will fit in nice and smoothly. When we're testing all this out, it can be a good idea to do essentially a test restore of the metadata and the data into another environment first. When you've just had a massive data incident, the last thing you want to do is jump in super gung-ho, do a data restore, and get the wrong data, or have any other kind of issue. So we do recommend a full, essentially a dry run into a full copy environment, and you can use this functionality here. Replicate the metadata first, push the data, check everything, and then run through it there back into production. So you've got that full option. You can then do it for real on the metadata side here. And then, of course, you've got the option to restore the data as well. There's two very different processes within Gearset for restoring data, and they depend very much on the different use cases and different situations that you can encounter. Sometimes we're talking about data recovery. It really is just an individual, sales or support who's lost a record, they've deleted an account, they've overwritten a contact, they've done something relatively simple, and they just need a couple of records back. We can do this via the essentially viewing the comparison. From here, we can then select records that we actually want to restore. So if I have a look at some changed accounts here, I can select some of these records, and I can actually kick off a restore process from here. Again, with deleted records as well, I can configure this. I think it's grayed out just at the moment because I haven't toggled a setting. So I'm going to very quickly jump out to my account and enable that one. Obviously, it's helpful if we can do data deployments to production orgs. That will help for a restore, so I'll make sure that's enabled. So yeah, that's the first option for restoring essentially small amounts of data. It's really quick, really easy. It just gets that end user back up and running as quickly as possible. The other option is going to be more of the full-blown restore process. It's going to take you through all of the configuration for finding related components, dependencies. It'll give you options for cross-referencing, and of course, filtering down the records you're going to restore. So we can jump in and just show you what this would look like briefly. So in this case, we only backed up a few different object types, so we might as well select a few of those there. When you select an object itself, you can choose how many records you need to restore. You can add filters in here as well. So maybe I need specific IDs, maybe I need languages that I want to pick, whatever it is that is going to allow me to restore the correct data. And obviously that is going to depend on how the incident came about. And then we'll grab related components as well. We'll click next. In case it will go through and find all of the related objects, really just making sure we can move what we need. I've got an exceptionally simple org here, so it hasn't picked up anything of interest. I'm sure when you run this on your own orgs, you'll have a lot more to run through. I think as well, just because of my demo selection, it's not pulled in anything particularly interesting there. You do get to decide your upsetting method, so you can push all of these records back in as brand new, or you can try and match them against the previously existing records. This can help you repopulate fields, specifically if you just lost field data as well. And then down the bottom, we've got some options for how do we handle errors. So in this case, do we want to continue deploying remaining records if we hit an error, or do we want to stop, make some changes, reconfigure a few things, and then start the process again? It really depends how you're going about this. I'll set this to continue deploying remaining records for now. We'll hit next here. There's some data masking functionality, which of course is disabled for running to production environments. We really don't want to be running any data scrambling here against the production environment for really obvious reasons. If we're moving to other orgs, for a test restore, for example, then you may want to scramble any PII just so you're not spreading that out across too many environments. Obviously, in this case, it is disabled here for my production restore. We'll go to the pre-deployment summary here. This will basically show you all of the individual steps that Gearset's going to go through to actually restore the data. So I don't know how many steps we'll have here. They can get really complex, especially for those larger restores. But we'll see what it comes up with in just a moment. This page and all the steps really associated with it will be very helpful later on if we do encounter any errors as well. It gives us the full run through step by step of what Gearset was attempting to do. If any records fail to get restored for any particular reason, you'll have the record ID and the error message, and that will allow you to turn off any automation that was causing issues, validation rules, that kind of thing. And then you have the option to kick off the migration, the restore again. Down the bottom of the page, you'll see the option to save this restore as a template. What we would recommend doing with any backup solution is testing it out regularly. practice this into a full copy, every couple of months. Just make sure you're familiar with it, so that if the time comes, you're well versed. Saving templates can be helpful. So if you know that there's something that, in the event of a crisis, you want to get back up and running immediately, something key, accounts, let's say, you can save a template for restoring that set of data, and next time around it'll be very, very quick. Essentially, all the configuration is saved for you, and you can just run through in a matter of clicks. Next up, and the final step here is to deploy some data. So I'm not going to click go today, just so I don't push all this data back into a production org here. But obviously, for your run through, click go. That'll go through each of the steps in order, and essentially give you an update on those as well.
That's awesome, Jack. We've had quite a few questions during that sort of restore flow, so we've just waited till you finish, so as to not interrupt you. I'll just start with the ones that came in first. So one of the questions was how much of the storage do you have as an option? Do you need to purchase additional storage depending on the sort of amount of data? And is it an add-on or a separate product?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, the data backup is essentially a separate product, so you don't need any of the metadata or data migration licenses to set up and use the data backup. So essentially standalone. You do get full functionality still in terms of restores and all that stuff. In terms of the storage, it's essentially unlimited. We price the tool per number of users in your environment. It tends to scale roughly with storage, but we don't limit the storage at all, and we don't charge you for any kind of additional storage or anything like that.
Great, thank you. A few more. Another question on how many times a day can you schedule a backup, and sort of best practices or recommendations around, how many times a day should you be backing up? And then a question on incremental backups. Do we run an entire snapshot every time, or is it just incremental backups?
Yeah, of course. So in terms of how often do we back up, if anybody's got some particularly sharp eyesight, they may have noticed that this particular backup I have on the left-hand side is a high-frequency backup job. That particular feature is, I think, still in beta, but being released very soon. So that'll give you some extra flexibility here. As a standard, our normal jobs run once a day. It tends to pick up, the majority of information. In particularly large organizations, what you do find though is that even 12 hours of data loss could be massive. Essentially, that's your recovery point. How far back in time do you need to be recovering from? And the way you can mitigate that is, first of all, just by running manual jobs every now and again, especially before major releases, major changes, new integrations. Run a full backup just so that recovery point is as near to the event as possible. When you're talking about massive user counts, you then might want to back up more frequently, and that's really where the high frequency backups come into play. I can't remember off the top of my head how often they run. It's every 2 or 4 hours, I think, and these are focused really on your most high usage objects, accounts, contacts, that kind of thing. So those are run as well. Essentially, the goal here is just to, like I said, ensure that recovery point in time is as near to the incident time as possible.
Awesome. Would you like me to carry on with the rest of the questions?
Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. So another question on, can you use this backup to move data from one environment to another, like a sandbox to prod?
You can do. There are some things you might be missing. Essentially, I don't see any reason why not, as long as essentially you're going to be taking the data that's from this production environment. If you want to take data from a dev environment up the other way, you need to use the data loader tool. So that particular use case tends to be focused on something like CPQ, config data, velocity, other managed packages. So if that's the use case that you have, it wouldn't really be covered by this one. But if you are just looking to push this data into other environments where the source location is this production org, then I think it would cover that use case for you.
Another question on, can you back up attachments and files as well?
Yep, so Gearset does run backup of all the binary data, so attachments and files. That's all stored for you. At the moment, the restore process won't restore that binary data. Just a point of transparency there. For the moment, that piece isn't included in the actual restore process. On its way very soon, just released this here with the solid piece for the actual records, and that restore process for the binary data is on the way. Currently, if you did need to restore that binary data, attachment files, etc., you go through sort of a standard process, something like data loader.
Okay, awesome. And the last question is a great one on sort of record IDs. So when I restore data, are the IDs also restored, or are new IDs created when the records are restored?
Yeah, so unfortunately we can't create records with the same IDs when we do a full restore. So what we do instead is essentially remap all of the IDs, and that's part of maintaining all the relationships between the records themselves. So although they don't have the exact same ID, if one record referenced another, we essentially remap that relationship to the new IDs. So they won't be exactly the same IDs, but you will still get the relationships between the records.
That's great. There's been a few questions actually on sort of the relationships between objects when you're taking a backup. Gearset handles all that sort of relationship mapping, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So essentially all that dependency hierarchy, sort of parent-child relationships, all of the I guess the process for automatically building out that map is within both the backup tool and sort of more importantly the restore tool as well. So it finds everything for you and essentially includes it into the package.
Following on from that, is there a limit to the depth of relationships that can be remapped?
So last time I checked, it was, I think, 17 levels deep. That was probably about a year ago last time I checked, but I don't think anybody's ever told me they needed more than that. Yeah, I think it's 17 levels deep. If you need more than that, let us know. I'm sure it's something we can add to.
Okay, fantastic. That's it for the questions that we've received so far. So I'll let you stop interrupting you and let you carry on.
Yeah, of course. We'll just jump back in here and run through a few final things. I think essentially we had covered, though, that idea of restoring the data. Oh, I think very quickly we were going to jump into the history. So there is a full history here. We haven't run any data migrations in the last 10 days. We did run one on the 1st of June. Essentially, though, this shows you which user has done a migration, either from which org if you're using the data migration piece, or from which specific backup if it's a restore, out to which environment. This is obviously just really, really useful in terms of an audit trail, who's been moving your data where. It's pretty important stuff to keep track of. You can have a look in here and view the details and take you through each individual step. You can rerun a migration as well. So if you did hit any errors, you can go away, fix those up and just rerun it again, which is quite nice. And you've got the option to sort of download a CSV of the results there as well. That's really the last piece on that restore process just there. There's a couple of other things which I'm sure we can run through as well. But my high frequency backup job has just kicked off there. I know for a fact I just created this before today's session, I think an hour ago. So my suspicion is that this runs once an hour. Last real sort of couple of things to run through. Obviously, with data backup, we have to start thinking about things like GDPR, CCPA, some of those regulations. Of course, Gearset will help you comply with those. So there are options to remove records from the backup. The process for that is just to remove the records. So the person who sort of made that right to be forgotten style request, remove them from the org first, and then jump in here, and there's a functionality just under the option here to remove record from the backup history, and that'll get rid of that. It just means that you don't accidentally push anybody's information back into your org. And probably the last thing as well, should you want to, you can download your metadata and data, keep that locally somewhere. I guess just another fail-safe on top of Gearset's backup as well. So that's an option that you can run through there. So yeah, just to recap, there's sort of really three core things within this metadata backup service we need to be thinking about. The first one is the actual pulling of that data, the storage. How do we handle that? Where's it stored? How's it encrypted, etc. The second piece, probably one of the most commonly overlooked actually, is that monitoring and visibility, making sure that recovery time, essentially that gap in time between when the incident happened and when you get your data back is as short as possible. That's really important. And then the last thing, of course, that we ran through was restoring the data itself. So three really big pieces of data backup, really as a function, something we can be doing. And I'll just reiterate again for a more in-depth run through of all of this in terms of the theory and the practice, rather than sort of the tooling side. Keep an eye out on the website for the ebook when that gets launched. Download that. There's so much good information there, and it really, takes it a step further than what we've done today.
Thank you so much, Jack, for all of that. A fantastic demo, getting to see how the tool works there. In terms of the ebook, we will be able to follow up with you guys and send you that when it's live. It should be live in the next week or so. But definitely recommend having a look at it, whether you choose to use Gearset or not. It's got some fantastic strategy ideas for the things you should be doing to protect your Salesforce environments. Do we have any more questions before we finish off tonight? Or today, I should say. We've got a question from David. So regarding restoration, do we have additional services to perform the rest, so professional services?
We don't have, I guess, a professional services team. We definitely thought about it, but overall, because of the ease of use of the tool, there wasn't really a market for it. So what we do have, and what I would definitely recommend engaging with, is the customer success team and the developers as well. I touched on it slightly earlier there, via the in-app chat. So all of this support is included in our standard licensing. The response time is really, really quick, and I think at any other company, they would probably charge for this and call it professional services, but you'll basically get a full level of support, screen shares, any assistance that you need, and that'll be available through there. So in name, probably not, but in function, almost certainly you get the support you'll need if the time comes here.
Amazing, thank you. Another question, so during a sandbox refresh, if we want to update custom settings, can we do that?
I'm just trying to remember essentially how custom settings are stored, whether that's part of the metadata or the data. I have to say I'm not entirely sure. As long as it's one of those, you will be able to with either the metadata or the data migration piece of Gearset. I have to, off the top of my head, I can't remember where that would fit in. But yeah, as long as it's available over essentially one of the APIs, then we'll be able to move it for you.
Okay, that's great. We can, if that's something that's really important to you as well, we can always, you can sort of drop us an email. We can chat to the team and see if that's, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think we've got either a blog post or a support doc on it somewhere, so we'll be able to point you to something relatively quickly.
Another question on, is the pricing based on Salesforce standard user count?
Yep, so it's just your active standard Salesforce user count. We tend to find that's the essentially the metric that people are most familiar with, and also the most predictable metric. Charging by data storage can be really tricky because you can change small settings within your org, and all of a sudden your data, storage doubles, and that changes things in quite unpredictable ways. So we stick to your active Salesforce user count. That tends to be pretty consistent, and people can forecast that pretty well as well.
Thank you for that. Any other questions, folks? I'm not sure any other questions are coming in yet, but I'll shout if they do. Thank you guys so much for the questions that you've shared with us already, though. It's really nice to get this level of engagement with while doing these webinars, and it makes the we want you guys to get as much value out of these as you can. Oh, another question on how many records can we move? I think we may have covered this. I think it's very high or unlimited, Jack?
So yeah, there's a couple of pieces. It does depend what you're doing. Essentially for the individual runs of the restores, it's currently, there is currently a soft limit, and we'll remove that pretty soon. It was just essentially while we were testing some infrastructure, basically. But yeah, it's currently a soft limit of 100,000 records per object selected for the restore, but then any related records are unlimited, and you can select as many objects as you like in the first instance. So you sort of throw all that together, and it can very easily be millions of records. I think that cap will be removed pretty soon, to be honest. We're definitely talking about that with another customer, just for that one specific entire org loss use case.
Great. Yeah, so just to reiterate, it's currently at 100K, but that's a temporary limit that will likely be lifted very soon. Yeah,
and that's not the total number of orgs per restoration as well. That is per object, not including the unlimited related objects, and for as many objects as you like. So yeah.
Perfect. Any other questions?
Yeah, if there are no more questions now, I know very much that as soon as you jump off a meeting or a call, sometimes a question pops into your head immediately. Happens to me all the time. So this evening, whenever it is down the line, if you're curious about something, you've got some questions, do reach out to us. You can reach us at team@gearset.com. It's TEAM at gearset.com, or you can reach me directly at jack@gearset.com, JACK. So send us over any questions if they pop up down the line, and we'll get back to those right away as well.